Behind those flawless performances, behind those synchronized moves that break the internet every single comeback, there's something most fans never get to see. Blood, sweat, tears, and yes, real injuries that could have ended everything. You think idol life is all about glamour and spotlight? Think again. What happens when a member pushes so hard in the practice room that their body literally gives up on them? What happens when the pursuit of perfection crosses the line into something genuinely dangerous? Have you ever wondered which Stray Kids member kept dancing even after hearing a crack in his own body? Or which one collapsed mid-practice and had to be rushed out of the studio? Can you guess who hid an injury for weeks just so he wouldn't burden the group before a major stage? And here's the one that'll really get you. Which member's injury was so heartbreaking that even the other members couldn't hold back their tears when they found out? From twisted ankles to muscle tears, from back problems that haunted rehearsals for months, to moments where pure willpower was the only thing keeping them standing. This list is not for the faint-hearted. These are real stories, real pain, and real sacrifices that Stray Kids made when nobody was watching. So buckle up, Stays, because we're counting down from number 7 all the way to number 1. And trust me, by the time we get to number 3, you're going to need tissues. Let's get into it.
Number 7. I.N. The youngest soldier who refused to sit down. You know what's wild about being the youngest in a group like Stray Kids? Everyone already looks at you like you have something to prove. Every single day, every single practice, every single stage, there's this invisible pressure sitting on your shoulders that says, you have to keep up, you have to match their energy, you can't be the one who falls behind. And for young Hyunjin, the beloved magne of Stray Kids, that pressure wasn't just something he felt, it was something he carried into every practice room session, like it was part of his own body weight. Now here's the thing about I.N that a lot of casual fans might not fully understand. When Stray Kids first debuted in 2018, Hyunjin was only 17 years old. 17. While most kids his age were stressing about school exams and hanging out with friends on weekends, this kid was grinding 12 to 15 hours a day in a JYP Entertainment practice room, learning choreography that would push even seasoned adult dancers to their limits. And it wasn't just about learning the steps, it was about perfecting them, about making every angle, every snap, every body roll look absolutely effortless on camera. That kind of physical demand on a body that's still literally growing? That's a recipe for disaster, and unfortunately, disaster came knocking. During one of their intense preparation periods, we're talking about a comeback season where the group was rehearsing the same choreography over and over and over again for hours on end, Hyunjin landed wrong after a jump sequence. Now if you've ever watched Stray Kids choreography, you know these aren't simple little hops. These are full-body explosive movements that require precise coordination between your upper body momentum and your lower body landing. And on that particular run-through, something went wrong. His right ankle twisted inward at an angle that ankles are absolutely not designed to twist. The sound alone, that sickening pop that echoed through the practice room, was enough to make everyone freeze mid-step. Changbin, who was closest to him at the time, later mentioned in a behind-the-scenes moment that the second he heard it, he knew it wasn't just a minor thing. The staff rushed over, and what they found was an ankle that was already starting to swell, turning that ugly shade of purple-red that tells you the ligaments just went through something traumatic. But here's where the story gets really interesting and, honestly, really frustrating in that heartbreaking kind of way. Because what did I.N do? Did he sit down? Did he call it a day? Did he let the medical staff take him to get it properly checked? No. This 17-year-old kid, with tears forming in his eyes that he was desperately trying to blink away, looked at his hyungs and said he was fine. Fine. With an ankle that was visibly swelling by the second. He actually tried to stand back up and continue the routine. Bang Chan, who's always been the protective leader figure, had to physically stop him and tell him that no choreography in the world was worth permanently damaging his ankle. And that moment right there? That tells you everything you need to know about the mentality that's been drilled into these idols from the second they enter the trainee system. The fear of being a burden, The fear of slowing down the group, the fear of being seen as weak. It's so deeply ingrained that a teenager with a potentially serious ankle injury would rather keep dancing than admit he needs help. Hyunjin eventually did get it treated, and thankfully it turned out to be a severe sprain rather than a full ligament tear, but the recovery period was anything but easy. He had to wear a compression brace during practices for weeks, and if you go back and watch certain fan cams and behind-the-scenes clips from that era, you can actually spot moments where he subtly shifts his weight to his left foot, compensating for the ankle that was still healing. He never complained about it publicly. He never made it a big deal on camera. In fact, most fans at the time had no idea anything had even happened because I.N made sure to smile through every single stage, every single fan meeting, every single V-Live like nothing was wrong. It was only later, through scattered mentions by other members and subtle hints dropped during group interviews, that Stays started piecing together what had actually gone down. And that's the thing that hits different about this story. It's not just about the injury itself. Ankle sprains happen in the dance world all the time. It's about the fact that the youngest member of the group, the one who should have been protected the most, felt like he couldn't afford to show weakness. It's about the idol industry culture that makes a 17-year-old believe that sitting out one practice session somehow makes him less worthy of his position in the group. Hyunjin has grown so much since then, both as a performer and as a person. These days, he's more open about taking care of his body, and the members have created a team environment where looking out for each other's health is just as important as nailing the choreography. But that moment in the practice room, that pop, that swelling, those held-back tears, and that stubborn refusal to stop, it remains one of those quiet reminders of just how much these idols sacrifice behind closed doors. The stage version of I.N is all bright smiles and powerful energy. The practice room version? That's where the real battle happens, and number 7 on our list is proof that even the youngest soldier in the Stray Kids army has scars he never shows the world. Number 6. Seungmin, the perfectionist whose body paid the price. If there's one word that defines Kim Seungmin's entire existence as an idol, it's discipline. This is a guy who doesn't just practice until he gets it right. He practices until he physically cannot get it wrong. Every vocal run, every dance move, every stage expression, Seungmin treats it all like a final exam that he absolutely cannot afford to fail. And honestly, that kind of work ethic is exactly what makes him one of the most reliable performers in Stray Kids. But here's the dark side of that coin that nobody talks about enough. When a perfectionist pushes too hard, they don't just hit a wall, they crash straight through it, and the damage isn't always something you can see on camera. Let's rewind to one of Stray Kids' most physically demanding comeback periods. We're talking about a choreography that required intense upper body work, sharp arm movements, rapid shoulder rotations, those powerful chest-popping sequences that make K-pop choreography look like it defies human anatomy. Now, most dancers will tell you that the shoulders are one of the most vulnerable joints in the human body. They have the widest range of motion of any joint, which sounds great until you realize that also means they're the easiest to overwork, overextend, and straight up destroy if you're not careful. And Seungmin? Careful was not in his vocabulary during that period. He was running through the choreography on repeat, not just during scheduled group practices, but during his own personal practice time that he carved out late at night after everyone else had already gone back to the dorm. While his members were resting, recovering, stretching out their muscles, Seungmin was back in that practice room drilling the same sequences over and over because one particular transition didn't feel smooth enough for his standards. And that's when it started. At first, it was just a dull ache in his right shoulder, the kind of soreness that every dancer learns to live with, the kind you shrug off with a quick stretch and some pain relief patches. Seungmin didn't think much of it. He slapped on a kinesiology tape, rolled his shoulder out a few times, and went right back to work. But the thing about repetitive strain injuries is that they don't announce themselves with a dramatic single moment. They creep up on you. Day after day, practice after practice, that dull ache turned into a sharp, stabbing pain that shot down from his shoulder blade all the way through his arm every time he executed certain movements. And still, Seungmin kept going. He adjusted his arm angles slightly to avoid the worst of the pain. He loaded up on anti-inflammatory patches before every session, and he made sure to position himself in formations where the camera angles wouldn't catch him wincing. That's how calculated this guy is even in pain. He was thinking about how it would look on screen. It wasn't until one particular practice session, when the group was doing a full run-through with the performance director watching, that things took a turn nobody expected. Midway through the second chorus, Seungmin went into a rapid arm sequence, and his right shoulder just locked. Not a pop, not a crack, it simply seized up, like someone had jammed a metal rod through the joint and welded it in place. His arm froze mid-air, and the pain that shot through him was so intense that he actually stumbled out of formation, grabbing his shoulder with his left hand. His face twisted into an expression that the members later described as genuinely scary to witness. Lino, who's known for his calm demeanor, was the first one to reach him, and even he looked shaken. The practice was immediately stopped, and the staff called in a physiotherapist who, after examining Seungmin's shoulder, delivered a diagnosis that nobody wanted to hear. He had developed a significant rotator cuff strain, compounded by inflammation in the surrounding tendons from weeks of overuse. The physio was blunt about it too. If Seungmin had kept pushing at the same intensity for even another week or two, they could have been looking at a partial tear and a partial rotator cuff tear in a performer's dominant arm. That's not a rest for a few days situation. That's a potential surgery situation. That's a your career trajectory just changed situation. And the thing that makes this story so uniquely Seungmin is what happened next. When the staff told him he needed to significantly reduce his practice hours and modify certain movements in the choreography to protect his shoulder, Seungmin didn't just accept it, he fought it. He actually argued that he could push through, that the pain was manageable, that modifying the choreography would make the overall group performance look inconsistent. Bang Chan had to sit him down privately and have a real conversation about the difference between dedication and self-destruction. And according to what Chan later shared, it took a while for that message to actually land, because Seungmin's biggest fear wasn't the pain, it was the idea of giving the fans a performance that was anything less than 100%. Let that sink in for a moment. This guy was more afraid of disappointing stays than he was of permanently injuring his shoulder. Eventually, the team worked out a compromise. Seungmin followed a strict rehabilitation program, daily physiotherapy sessions, targeted strengthening exercises for the rotator cuff, and a modified practice schedule that gave his shoulder actual recovery time between sessions. The choreography team also made subtle adjustments to certain sequences, reducing the range of motion required for his right arm in specific sections without making it obvious to viewers. And if you go back and watch the performances from that era with this context in mind, you can actually spot the differences. There are moments where Seungmin's right arm movements are slightly more contained than the other members, moments where his angles are just a degree or two different, small enough that the average viewer would never notice, but significant enough that a trained eye can tell this is a performer who's dancing around an injury in real time. The recovery took months. Not days. Not weeks, months of patient, frustrating rehabilitation where Seungmin had to fight against every instinct in his body that told him to push harder. And even after the acute pain subsided, he dealt with flare-ups for a long time afterward, those random moments during practice where the shoulder would remind him that it hadn't fully forgiven him for what he put it through. To this day, Seungmin is more conscious about his upper body warm-ups and cool-downs than probably any other member. He's learned the hard way that his body isn't a machine that he can just run into the ground without consequences. But that lesson came at a cost, and that cost was weeks of silent pain, hidden grimaces, modified choreography, and a physiotherapy bill that could probably fund a small vacation. The perfectionist paid the price, and number 6 on our list is a reminder that the pursuit of flawlessness can leave marks that no amount of stage makeup can cover. Number 5. Changbin. The powerhouse who heard his own body break. Let's talk about Changbin for a second, because if you know anything about this man, you know that the word gentle does not exist in his performance vocabulary. Changbin doesn't dance, he attacks the stage. He doesn't move, he detonates. Every single movement this guy makes on stage carries a weight and an intensity that makes you feel like the floor should be cracking beneath his feet. He's the member who turns every choreography into a full contact sport, the one whose fan cams go viral not because of smooth, pretty lines, but because of raw, unfiltered power that practically radiates through the screen. And that exact quality, that relentless, explosive energy, is precisely what made his injury story one of the most jarring moments in Stray Kids' practice room history. It happened during the preparation phase for a comeback that featured one of their most aggressive, high-impact choreographies. We're talking about a routine that was designed to be physically punishing from start to finish, hard-hitting drops, floor work that required you to throw your entire body weight downward and catch yourself in split-second timing. And those signature power moves that Stray Kids are famous for, the kind where it looks like gravity is personally offended by what they're doing. Now, Changbin had been going hard all week. And when I say hard, I don't mean regular K-pop idol hard. I mean Changbin hard, which is basically regular hard multiplied by whatever irrational number represents his stubbornness. He was the first one in the practice room and the last one out, running through sequences with a ferocity that even the choreographer had to occasionally tell him to dial back. But Changbin doesn't dial back. That's not how he's wired. He operates at one speed, and that speed is maximum. So when the group was running through the full choreography for what had to be the 20th time that day, nobody thought to stop and say, "Hey, maybe we should take a break." Because the energy in that room was electric and everyone was feeding off of Changbin's intensity. And then came that one move. It was a sequence that required a sharp, explosive twist of the torso combined with a forward drop. Basically, you rotate your upper body at high speed while simultaneously slamming downward into a crouched position. It's the kind of move that looks absolutely devastating on stage, but requires your core and your ribcage to absorb an enormous amount of rotational force in a very small window of time. Changbin had done this move dozens of times already that day. His muscles were fatigued, his body was running on the fumes of whatever energy drink he'd downed 3 hours ago, and his form, which had been razor-sharp at the start of the session, was starting to slip in ways that are almost invisible to the naked eye but catastrophically significant to the human skeletal system. On that particular run-through, Changbin rotated too far, too fast, with too much force, and his body simply couldn't absorb it. There was a crack. Not a pop. Not a snap, a crack. The kind of sound that makes everyone in the room stop breathing for a second, because somewhere deep in your primal brain, you know that sound means something structural just gave way. Changbin's hands flew to his left side, right around the lower ribs, and he dropped out of formation, bent over, unable to straighten up. His face went pale, and this is Changbin we're talking about, a guy whose pain tolerance is borderline legendary. For him to visibly react like that, everyone in that room knew instantly that this was serious. The staff rushed in, and Changbin was doing that thing where he was trying to wave everyone off, trying to say, I'm fine," through clenched teeth, but his body was telling a completely different story. He couldn't take a deep breath without sharp, shooting pain radiating across his entire left side. He couldn't stand up straight. He couldn't even lift his left arm without the pain spiking so intensely that it brought moisture to his eyes, and let me tell you, seeing Changbin, the guy who projects nothing but raw strength and confidence, fighting back tears from sheer physical pain, that hits different. It hits really, really different. He was taken to get examined, and the results came back with news that landed like a punch to the gut, a cracked rib. Not bruised, not strained, cracked. The cartilage connecting one of his lower ribs to the sternum had fractured under the accumulated stress of repetitive high-impact movements performed on a fatigued body without adequate rest. And here's the thing about cracked ribs that most people don't realize: there's basically nothing you can do about them. You can't put a cast on a rib. You can't splint it. You just have to let it heal on its own, and the healing process takes anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks minimum, during which every breath, every cough, every laugh, every sudden movement sends a reminder through your entire torso that something in there is broken. For a performer like Changbin, whose entire stage identity is built on explosive power and aggressive physicality, a cracked rib is basically a prison sentence. He couldn't do any of the high-impact moves. He couldn't execute the floor work. He couldn't even practice his rap delivery at full intensity because projecting his voice with that kind of force requires core engagement, and core engagement with a cracked rib feels like someone is shoving a hot knife between your ribs from the inside. The comeback schedule didn't stop, though. It couldn't. The industry doesn't wait for injuries to heal, and Changbin knew that better than anyone. So what did he do? He worked with the choreography team to modify his parts, not eliminate them, modify them. He found ways to execute moves that looked powerful on camera while secretly reducing the rotational stress on his left side. He compensated with his right side, shifted his center of gravity, used angles and facial expressions to project the same intensity even when his body was operating at maybe 60% capacity. And the crazy part? Most fans watching those stages had absolutely no idea. They saw Changbin being Changbin, fierce, powerful, commanding. They didn't see the ice packs he pressed against his side the second the cameras stopped rolling. They didn't see him sitting in the waiting room with his jaw clenched, breathing in shallow, controlled breaths because deep breathing was still agony. They didn't see Han sitting next to him after every performance, quietly passing him pain relief patches without saying a word because Han knew that Changbin would rather suffer in silence than admit out loud that he was hurting. And that silent camaraderie, that unspoken understanding between members, is honestly one of the most beautiful and heartbreaking things about this whole story. Changbin eventually healed, as ribs do, but anyone who's ever cracked a rib will tell you that you never quite forget what it feels like. There are phantom twinges that show up months later, little reminders during intense practice sessions where your body flinches at a certain angle because it remembers what happened the last time you pushed it that far. Changbin has talked about being smarter with his body since then, about understanding the difference between pushing your limits and ignoring your body's warning signals. But in the heat of the moment, in the middle of a practice session where the energy is high and the adrenaline is pumping and the perfectionist in him is screaming to go harder, that discipline is a daily battle. And every time you watch Changbin perform now, every time you see him execute one of those explosive power moves that makes the crowd lose their minds, just remember that power has a price tag, and at number 5 on our list, we've seen exactly what that price looks like when the receipt finally comes due. A crack that echoed through a practice room, a powerhouse brought to his knees, and a recovery that tested not just his body, but his identity as a performer. Number 4. Lee No, the dance machine whose knees betrayed him. If you had to pick one member of Stray Kids whose entire identity as a performer is built on movement, pure, precise, breathtaking movement, it would be Lee No without a single second of hesitation. Lee Miho didn't just train to become a dancer. He was born one. Before he ever stepped foot inside JYP Entertainment, before he ever auditioned, before he ever even dreamed of becoming an idol, this guy was already dancing. He was a backup dancer for BTS. He trained under some of the most rigorous dance programs in South Korea, and by the time he entered the Stray Kids system, his body had already been through years of intense physical conditioning that most trainees couldn't even imagine. His legs, in particular, were his signature. The fluidity of his lower body, the control he had over every single micro-movement from his hips down to his toes, the way he could shift weight and change direction with a smoothness that made it look like physics simply didn't apply to him. That was Lee No's superpower. And that's exactly why what happened to his knees wasn't just an injury. It was an attack on the very foundation of who he is as an artist. It didn't come out of nowhere, though. That's the cruel thing about knee injuries in dancers. They build up slowly, whispering before they scream. Lee No had been dealing with what he casually dismissed as stiffness in his right knee for a while before the real damage made itself known. After long practice sessions, he'd noticed that the knee felt tight, like something inside the joint wasn't moving as freely as it should. He'd stretch it out, maybe apply some heat, do a few careful bends to loosen it up, and within 20 minutes, it would feel normal again. So he ignored it. Because that's what dancers do. They collect these little aches and pains like souvenirs and convince themselves that it's just the cost of doing business. But the body keeps a ledger, and eventually, the bill comes due. It was during a particularly grueling comeback preparation, One of those periods where Stray Kids was learning not just one choreography, but multiple routines for different stages, different versions, different special performances. The volume of dance practice was staggering even by idol standards. We're talking 6, 7, 8 hours of continuous lower body intensive movement, day after day, with barely enough recovery time between sessions for the muscles to repair, let alone for the joints to recuperate. And Lino, being Lino, wasn't just doing the group sessions. He was staying after to perfect his individual parts. He was experimenting with additional flourishes and stylistic details that he wanted to add to make his fan cams stand out. He was pushing his legs through a workload that would make a professional athlete's trainer break out in a cold sweat. The breaking point came during a floor to standing transition, one of those moves where you go from a low crouch position to a full standing leap in one explosive motion. Lino had done this move literally thousands of times throughout his career. It was muscle memory at this point, as natural to him as breathing. But on this particular attempt, when he drove upward from the crouch, his right knee buckled. Not fully, it didn't collapse out from under him. It was more like a hitch, a mechanical failure where the joint started to extend and then caught, like a gear that skips a tooth. The sensation that shot through his knee was unlike anything he'd felt before, not a sharp, acute pain like a tear, but a deep, grinding discomfort that radiated through the entire joint, accompanied by a feeling of instability that made him immediately lose confidence in the leg's ability to support his weight. He stumbled, caught himself, and stood still for a moment with his jaw clenched, one hand instinctively hovering near his right knee as if he could somehow hold the joint together through willpower alone. And here's where Lino's personality becomes both his greatest strength and his most dangerous flaw. He didn't stop. He didn't even pause. He shook the leg out, took a breath, and jumped right back into the choreography like nothing had happened. It wasn't until after the session ended, when the adrenaline wore off and the knee started swelling with a persistence that even Lino couldn't pretend away, that the reality of the situation set in. The medical evaluation revealed what dancers dread more than almost anything else: patellar tendinitis in the right knee, commonly known as jumper's knee, combined with early signs of cartilage wear in the joint. Patellar tendinitis is an overuse injury of the tendon connecting the kneecap to the shin bone, and it's caused by exactly the kind of repetitive jumping, landing, and explosive leg movements that define Lino's dance style. But here's the part that turned this from a bad situation into a genuinely scary one: the cartilage wear. Cartilage doesn't regenerate. Once it starts deteriorating, you can manage it, you can slow it down, but you cannot undo the damage. For a dancer whose career depends on his knees being able to absorb thousands upon thousands of high-impact landings over the course of years and decades, hearing that the cartilage in your dominant knee is already showing wear at your age is like a ticking clock being placed in front of you. It doesn't mean your career is over, but it means you're now dancing on borrowed time, and every practice, every performance, every extra run-through you do is a negotiation between your ambition and your anatomy. The treatment plan was comprehensive and, for someone like Lino, absolutely maddening. Reduced practice intensity. Mandatory rest days. A strict regimen of physical therapy focused on strengthening the muscles around the knee to reduce the load on the joint itself. No more staying after practice for extra solo sessions. No more running through high-impact sequences without proper warm-up. And most painfully for Lino, no more spontaneous, full-out freestyle sessions where he could just lose himself in movement without thinking about the consequences. Every dance move now had to be calculated. Every jump had to be weighed against the cost to his knee. Every landing had to be technically perfect, not because of aesthetics, but because a bad landing could accelerate the cartilage damage and bring him closer to the day when his knee simply couldn't handle it anymore. Lino dealt with this the way Lino deals with everything: quietly, stoically, and with a dry humor that masked the real weight of what he was carrying. He'd joke about being an old man during practice when he had to sit out certain sequences. He'd make offhand comments about his retirement plan, with that trademark deadpan delivery that made the other members laugh even though they knew it wasn't entirely a joke. Felix, in particular, seemed to sense the gravity of it more than the others, there were moments caught on camera where Felix would subtly position himself near Lee No during group stretches, quietly checking on his knee, offering those little wordless gestures of support that speak louder than any conversation. And the thing that truly makes this story land at number 4 on our list is the ongoing nature of it. This wasn't a one-time injury with a clean recovery arc. This is something Lee No lives with. Every comeback, every tour, every practice session, his right knee is a factor. He wears supportive bracing during intense rehearsals. He's meticulous about his warm-up routine in a way he never used to be. He's had to accept that the way he danced at 19 is not the way he can dance at 25, and that acceptance, for someone whose entire soul is expressed through movement, is a grief that doesn't really have a name. But here's what makes Lee No extraordinary in spite of all of it. Watch him on stage today, and you would never, ever know. The fluidity is still there. The precision is still there. The magic that happens when Lee No starts moving is completely intact. But what you're watching now isn't just talent. It's talent filtered through discipline, pain management, strategic body mechanics, and a quiet, relentless determination to keep doing the thing he loves even though his body has made it clear that the price gets higher every single year. That's not just an injury story. That's a war of attrition between an artist and his own anatomy, and so far, Lee No is winning. But the fight never stops, and every time he hits that stage, he's stepping into battle with a knee that remembers every single thing he's put it through. Number 3. Hyunjin. The boy who danced until he couldn't stand. This is the one. This is the story we warned you about at the very beginning of this list. The one that sits at the exact center of our countdown not because it was the most physically severe, but because of what it did to Hwang Hyunjin emotionally. And what it did to every single person who witnessed it happen in real time inside that practice room. If you've ever watched Hyunjin perform and felt something stir inside your chest, something you couldn't quite name, something between admiration and heartache, then you already understand on some instinctive level that this man doesn't just dance with his body. He dances with his entire soul. Every extension of his arm is a sentence. Every turn of his head is a confession. Every movement he makes on stage carries an emotional weight that most performers spend their entire careers trying to achieve and never quite reach. Hyunjin was born with that gift, and he has spent every waking moment since becoming an idol refining it, sharpening it, pouring everything he has into it. And that is precisely why what happened to him during one of the most critical practice periods in Stray Kids' career didn't just break his body, it nearly broke his spirit. The comeback they were preparing for was massive. The kind of comeback where the entire team knew the stakes were sky high, where every detail had to be flawless, where the choreography was designed to be a statement piece that would define their artistic direction for the next era. And the choreography itself? It was brutal. Not just difficult, brutal. It demanded a level of physicality that pushed every member to their absolute edge, and for Hyunjin, who always takes it upon himself to be the emotional anchor of every performance, the standard he set for himself was even higher than what the choreographer had asked for. He wasn't just learning the moves, he was trying to inhabit them, to make every second of that routine feel like it was being performed for the very last time. And that meant practicing with an intensity that went beyond what his body was prepared to sustain. The days leading up to the incident, multiple members later admitted they had noticed something was off. Hyunjin was quieter than usual during breaks. He was rolling out his lower back more frequently, pressing his fists into the muscles along his spine with a grimace he tried to hide behind his hair. Felix mentioned in a later interview that he'd asked Hyunjin if he was okay during one of those breaks, and Hyunjin had given him that signature smile, the one that lights up his whole face and makes you believe everything is fine, and said, "Just a little tight. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it." Those 4 words are going to haunt the story like a ghost, because what Hyunjin was calling a little tight was actually the early stages of a severe lumbar muscle spasm that had been building for days, fueled by overtraining, insufficient recovery, and the kind of emotional stress that Hyunjin absorbs like a sponge because he feels everything 10 times deeper than most people. The day it happened started like any other practice day. The group warmed up, stretched, ran through the choreography a few times at half speed to lock in the formations, and then started doing full run-throughs at performance intensity. Hyunjin was pushing hard from the very first run. Harder than necessary. Honestly, the choreographer even told him to save some energy for the later takes, but Hyunjin couldn't help it. When the music hits and the emotion of the performance takes over, he doesn't know how to hold back. It's like asking a fire to burn at half temperature. It's simply not in his nature. It was during the fourth full run-through that it happened. The choreography called for a sequence where Hyunjin had to execute a deep back bend into a rapid straightening motion, basically folding his spine backward and then snapping upright in one fluid movement. He'd done it perfectly 3 times already. On the fourth, his lower back seized. And when I say seized, I don't mean it tightened up. I mean every muscle along the left side of his lumbar spine contracted simultaneously and locked into a spasm so violent that Hyunjin's legs gave out from under him. He didn't stumble. He didn't stagger. He went down. Straight down onto the practice room floor, his body curling into a fetal position as his hands clawed at his lower back, his face contorted into an expression of pure, unfiltered agony that every single person in that room will never forget as long as they live. The music kept playing for a few seconds, those awful, dissonant seconds where the beat is still pumping through the speakers, but nobody is dancing anymore because everyone has frozen, staring at Hyunjin on the floor. Then someone killed the music, and the silence that replaced it was somehow worse. Hyunjin was trying to breathe, but the spasm was so intense that every inhale sent a shockwave of pain through his entire back, forcing his breaths into these short, shallow, desperate gasps that sounded like someone drowning on dry land. And then came the sound that shattered everyone in that room. Hyunjin started crying. Not quiet tears. Not the controlled, camera-ready emotion that idols are trained to display. This was raw, guttural, broken crying, the kind that comes from a place so deep inside you that it bypasses every defense mechanism you've ever built and just pours out of you like blood from a wound. And he wasn't crying because of the pain. That's what makes this story destroy you. He was crying because, in that moment, lying on the floor of that practice room, unable to move, unable to straighten his own spine, Hyunjin believed he had failed. He believed he had let the group down. He believed that his body's collapse was somehow a reflection of his inadequacy as a performer, and that belief, that cruel, irrational, absolutely heartbreaking belief, was causing him more agony than the spasm itself. Bang-chan was at his side in seconds, kneeling down on the floor next to him, one hand on Hyunjin's shoulder, speaking to him in a low, steady voice that was trying so hard to be calm, but couldn't quite hide the tremor underneath. Han was standing a few feet away, and according to multiple accounts, he had to turn around and face the wall because he couldn't watch Hyunjin like that without breaking down himself. Felix knelt on Hyunjin's other side, and he didn't say anything. He just placed his hand on Hyunjin's arm and kept it there, steady and warm, a silent anchor. And then Lino, who carries his own knee pain in silence every single day, who never shows vulnerability if he can help it, who has a reputation for being the most emotionally guarded member of the group, Lino walked over, looked down at Hyunjin on that floor, and his eyes filled with tears. He didn't let them fall. He blinked them back, clenched his jaw, and quietly told the staff to call the physiotherapist. But the members saw it. They all saw it. And in that moment, every single person in that practice room understood that this wasn't just about a back spasm. This was about a family watching one of their own shatter in front of them. The physiotherapist arrived and worked on Hyunjin's back for over 30 minutes before the spasm finally released enough for him to be carefully helped into a sitting position. His face was swollen from crying, his eyes red, his body trembling from the residual shock of the spasm. And even then, even in that state, the first words out of his mouth were an apology. "I'm sorry for stopping practice." That sentence. That single, quiet, devastating sentence broke something in the room that no amount of physical therapy could fix. Changbin actually had to leave the room after hearing it. He stepped into the hallway and stood there for a few minutes, composing himself, because the idea that Hyunjin, who had just experienced one of the most physically traumatic moments of his life, was apologizing for inconveniencing the team was simply too much to process without losing it. The diagnosis was severe lumbar muscle spasm with underlying strain in the erector spinae muscles, compounded by early-stage disc compression from repetitive hyperextension movements. The recovery protocol was extensive, mandatory rest from all dance practice for a minimum of 2 weeks, daily physiotherapy, anti-inflammatory treatment, and a strict prohibition on any back-bending movements until cleared by a specialist. For Hyunjin, those 2 weeks were torture of a different kind. Not physical torture, emotional torture. He watched his members practice from the sidelines, sitting on the floor of the practice room with a heat pad pressed against his back, learning the choreography with his eyes because his body wasn't allowed to participate. And every time he watched them run through the routine without him, you could see it in his face, that quiet anguish, that feeling of being left behind, that fear that maybe the group was better off without him slowing them down. The members refused to let him sit in that darkness alone. They took turns sitting with him during breaks, showing him the formations on their phones so he could stay mentally engaged. Chan would stay after practice to walk through the choreography with Hyunjin at quarter speed, just the upper body movements, so he could feel connected to the routine even if his back wouldn't let him dance it fully. Felix started sending him late-night voice messages, not about practice, not about the comeback, just about random things, funny stories, stupid jokes, anything to keep Hyunjin's mind from spiraling into the self-blame that was eating him alive. When Hyunjin finally returned to full practice, he was different. Number 2. Han. The genius whose body and mind declared war at the same time. Han Jae-sung. Where do you even begin with a person like Han Jae-sung? This is a guy who writes lyrics that crawl inside your chest and make a home there. A rapper whose speed and precision make veteran hip-hop artists do a double take. A vocalist whose emotional range can go from raw aggression to devastating vulnerability within the same song. A performer who brings an energy to the stage that's so electric, so alive, so overwhelmingly present that you almost forget he's human. And maybe that's the problem. Maybe we all fans, staff, even the members sometimes, got so used to Han being superhuman that nobody noticed when the human underneath started to crack. Because here's the truth about Han Jae-sung that makes this story hit harder than almost anything else on this list. Han doesn't just carry the physical demands of being a Stray Kids member. He carries the mental ones too. And he's been open about it, bravely and publicly open about the fact that he battles anxiety. Not the casual, everyday kind of nervousness that everyone experiences from time to time. Real, clinical, sometimes paralyzing anxiety that can ambush him without warning and turn ordinary moments into psychological warfare. He's talked about panic attacks. He's talked about moments where his chest tightens and his vision narrows and his brain tells him that something catastrophic is about to happen even when nothing is wrong. And he's talked about it with the honesty that has helped countless fans feel less alone in their own struggles, which makes him one of the bravest people in the entire K-pop industry. But bravery doesn't make you bulletproof, and what happened to Han during one of Stray Kids' most intense practice periods proved that in the most devastating way possible. The physical side of it started simply enough. The group was deep into preparations for a comeback with a choreography that featured rapid, complex footwork, the kind of sequences where your feet are moving so fast that one misplaced step can send everything cascading into disaster. Han, despite being primarily recognized for his vocal and rap abilities, has always held his own in dance. He's not the flashiest mover in the group, but his timing is impeccable and his energy more than compensates for any technical gaps. But this particular choreography was pushing him to his absolute limits. There was one sequence in particular, a rapid lateral movement followed by a sudden directional change that required his ankles and knees to absorb an enormous amount of lateral force in a fraction of a second. Han had been struggling with this section all week, not because he couldn't do it, but because his body was accumulating fatigue faster than it could recover. He wasn't sleeping well, Anxiety has a way of turning nighttime into a battlefield, and the combination of physical exhaustion and sleep deprivation was creating a perfect storm inside his body that nobody fully recognized until it was too late. It happened on a day that had already been long. The group had been practicing for hours, and Han was running on maybe 4 hours of broken sleep from the night before. His body was operating on fumes, his reaction time was slightly slower than usual, and his muscles were screaming for rest that he refused to give them. During a full run-through of the choreography, Han hit that lateral sequence and his left foot caught wrong on the practice room floor. His ankle rolled outward, not a clean roll, but an ugly, twisting motion that wrenched the ligaments on the outside of the ankle while simultaneously sending a jolt of force up through his knee. He went down hard on his left side, his hip and elbow hitting the floor with a thud that echoed through the room, and for a second, everything went quiet as the members stopped and the music was cut. But here's where Han's story diverges from every other injury on this list, and where it becomes something far more complex, far more painful, and far more important to talk about. As Han lay on that practice room floor, clutching his ankle, feeling the sharp, immediate pain of the sprain radiating through his lower leg, something else activated. Something that had nothing to do with his ankle. His chest tightened. His breathing, which should have been heavy from exertion, suddenly became shallow and erratic in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. His heart rate, already elevated from dancing, spiked into a rhythm that felt less like exercise and more like his body was preparing for a threat that didn't exist. Han was having a panic attack. Right there on the floor of the practice room, with a freshly sprained ankle and 7 members staring at him, his anxiety disorder chose that exact moment to detonate. And the cruelty of that timing cannot be overstated. Because a panic attack doesn't care that you're already dealing with a physical injury. It doesn't wait for a convenient moment. It stacks itself on top of whatever you're already going through and multiplies the suffering exponentially. So now Han wasn't just dealing with the pain in his ankle, he was dealing with the feeling of his chest being crushed, the sensation that he couldn't get enough air no matter how hard he breathed, the racing thoughts telling him that something was catastrophically wrong, that he was dying, that the walls were closing in, that everyone was watching him fall apart and thinking less of him for it. His hands started shaking, not from the ankle injury, but from the adrenaline dump that a panic attack floods through your system. His eyes went wide, unfocused, darting around the room like he was looking for an exit from something invisible. And the members who have been through this with Han before, who have learned over years of living and working together how to recognize the signs and how to respond, moved with a coordination that was as practiced and precise as any choreography they've ever performed. Changbin was there first, dropping to his knees beside Han, not touching him, because they've learned that during a panic attack, unexpected physical contact can make things worse, but positioning himself in Han's line of sight, speaking in a low, steady voice, repeating simple grounding phrases. You're here. You're safe. I'm right here. Just look at me. Breathe with me. Felix moved to Han's other side, his deep voice providing a second anchor point, counting breaths out loud in a slow, rhythmic cadence. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. You're doing great, Jisung. You're doing great. Bang Chan stood back, not because he didn't want to be close, but because he was coordinating with the staff, getting water, getting a cool towel, making sure the room was being cleared of unnecessary people so Han had space to breathe without feeling watched. Seungmin quietly turned off the overhead fluorescent lights and switched on the softer side lighting because they had learned from experience that harsh lighting during a panic episode can heighten the sense of overwhelm. This was a team that had turned crisis response into second nature, and the fact that they had to be that practiced at it tells you everything about how often Han has fought this battle. It took almost 15 minutes for the panic attack to subside enough for Han to speak. 15 minutes of controlled breathing, of quiet reassurance, of Changbin's steady voice cutting through the static in Han's brain, of Felix's counted breaths providing a rhythm for Han's lungs to follow. And when Han finally came back, when his eyes refocused, when his breathing steadied, when his hands stopped trembling, the first thing he did was look down at his ankle, which had swollen significantly during the panic episode because nobody had been able to ice it while they were focused on managing his mental state, and he laughed. Not a happy laugh. A hollow, exhausted, defeated laugh. The kind of laugh that says, of course this is happening. Of course my body and my brain decided to fall apart at the exact same time. And then, almost immediately after the laugh, the tears came. Quiet ones. Not dramatic, not loud, just tears sliding down his face as the full weight of everything crashed over him. The ankle. The panic attack. The practice time lost. The members having to stop everything to take care of him. The feeling of being a burden, that word, that specific word, burden, is one that Han has used before when talking about his anxiety, and it's a word that breaks the hearts of everyone who loves him because it could not be further from the truth. The ankle sprain was treated a grade 2 lateral sprain that required bracing, reduced weight bearing, and several weeks of modified activity. But the ankle was almost secondary to the real recovery that needed to happen, which was emotional. Han had to work through the shame spiral that followed the incident, the irrational but deeply felt belief that his anxiety made him a liability, that his panic attack had stolen practice time from the group, that his members secretly resented having to take care of him when they had their own preparations to worry about. It was Chan who addressed this head-on, in a conversation that Han later referenced in AV Live without going into specifics, but with enough emotional weight that fans understood something significant had been said. Chan told him, and this has been corroborated through various member interviews and behind-the-scenes moments, that Han's vulnerability wasn't a weakness. That the courage it takes to keep showing up, keep performing, keep creating, keep giving everything to the fans while fighting an invisible war inside his own head every single day was the most impressive thing any of them had ever witnessed. That the group didn't function in spite of Han's struggles, it functioned because, number 1. Bang Chan. The leader who broke himself so his team wouldn't have to. There's a reason this man is at the top of this list, and it has nothing to do with ranking pain on a scale of 1 to 10. It has nothing to do with which injury looked the most dramatic or which recovery took the longest. Bang Chan sits at number 1 because his injury story isn't a single moment. It's the culmination of years of self-sacrifice so relentless, so absolute, so pathologically selfless that his body eventually staged a full-scale revolt against the man who refused to let it rest. If you want to understand Bang Chan's injury, you have to first understand Bang Chan's lifestyle, and his lifestyle is, to put it bluntly, a medical professional's worst nightmare. This is a man who routinely sleeps 2 to 3 hours a night. Not occasionally, routinely. He produces music until 4, 5, 6 in the morning, grabs a sliver of sleep, and then shows up to group practice at 9 or 10 looking like he's been awake for 20 minutes, when in reality, he's been running on caffeine and sheer willpower for the better part of 20 hours. He does this not because he doesn't understand the importance of sleep. He's an intelligent, well-read person who knows exactly what sleep deprivation does to the human body. He does it because there are always more songs to produce, more demos to refine, more lyrics to adjust, more creative decisions to make for the group, and in Bang Chan's mind, every hour he spends sleeping is an hour he's not spending making Stray Kids better. Add to that the fact that Chan doesn't just carry his own workload, he carries everyone else's emotional weight too. When Hyunjin was on that practice room floor with a back spasm, who was the first one kneeling beside him? Chan. When Han had a panic attack compounded by an ankle sprain, who was coordinating the staff response while keeping his own emotions in check? Chan. When I.N tried to dance on a swollen ankle because he was afraid of being a burden, who physically stopped him and had the conversation about self-worth? Chan. When Seungmin was arguing that he could push through a shoulder that was locking up, who sat him down and drew the line between dedication and self-destruction? Chan. Every single injury on this list, every single crisis, every single moment where a member needed someone to lean on, Chan was there. And every single time he showed up for someone else, he was running on a body that was screaming for him to show up for himself. The neck and upper back problems had been building for longer than anyone in the team fully realized. Chan spent ungodly hours hunched over his studio equipment, his laptop, his MIDI controller, his mixing board, in positions that would make an ergonomics specialist weep. His head perpetually tilted forward, his shoulders rounded, his cervical spine locked in a flexion pattern that was slowly, systematically destroying the structural integrity of his neck muscles and the discs between his vertebrae. He'd mentioned neck stiffness before, casually, the way you mention that it's raining outside, just a fact of life, not worth dwelling on. He'd roll his neck between takes during recording sessions, press his thumbs into the base of his skull during breaks, and occasionally ask a staff member for a pain patch to stick on the back of his neck before practice. But he never stopped. He never adjusted his studio setup. He never reduced his hours. Because in Chan's calculus, his discomfort was always less important than the group's output. The breaking point came during a period that was punishing even by Stray Kids standards. They were simultaneously preparing for a comeback and a concert tour, which meant the practice schedule was essentially doubled. Morning sessions for concert rehearsals, afternoon and evening sessions for comeback choreography, and then Chan's personal late-night studio sessions on top of all of it. He was sleeping maybe 90 minutes a night during this stretch, and even that sleep was fragmented. He'd set alarms to wake himself up so he could check on mix revisions or respond to messages from the production team. His body was running on a deficit so profound that the question wasn't whether it would collapse, but when. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. Nothing special about the day, nothing particularly unusual about the practice session. The group was running through concert choreography, a high-energy set piece that required sustained full-body movement for several minutes straight. Chan was dancing, and by all external appearances, he looked fine. Maybe a little tired, which was his permanent state of being at this point, but functional. Moving. Hitting his marks. And then, mid-routine, something shifted behind his eyes. It was subtle enough that most people wouldn't have noticed, but Lino, who was positioned next to Chan in the formation, caught it instantly. Chan's movements, which had been sharp and precise seconds earlier, suddenly became loose. Not relaxed loose, disconnected loose. Like the signal between his brain and his muscles had developed static. His arms started lagging half a beat behind the music. His footwork, usually meticulous, became shuffling and imprecise. And his head started tilting to the right in a way that wasn't part of the choreography, drooping toward his shoulder like the muscles on the left side of his neck had simply stopped engaging. Lino broke formation and grabbed Chan's arm, and the moment he made contact, Chan's legs buckled. Not dramatically, there was no Hollywood collapse, no crashing to the floor. His knees just softened, his center of gravity shifted, and if Lino hadn't been holding his arm, he would have gone down. Chan's eyes were open but unfocused, glassy, and when Lino said his name, Chan look at me, it took a full 3 seconds for Chan to track toward the sound and another 2 seconds for recognition to register in his expression. So there you have it. 7 members. 7 injuries. 7 stories that most fans never see because they happen behind closed practice room doors, in physiotherapy clinics, in late-night conversations between members who carry each other's pain like it's their own. Let's take a step back and look at what we just walked through, because when you lay these stories side by side, they stop being individual incidents and start forming a portrait of something much bigger. Number 7, I.N showed us the pressure that falls on the youngest, a 17-year-old who tried to dance on a swollen ankle because he was more afraid of being a burden than being in pain. Number 6, Seungmin showed us what happens when perfectionism becomes self-destruction, a shoulder that locked up midair because a young man refused to practice at anything less than 100%. Number 5, Changbin showed us the cost of raw power, a cracked rib echoing through a practice room, a powerhouse who performed at 60% capacity and still made it look like 100. Number 4, Lino showed us the long game of chronic injury, a dance machine negotiating with his own knees every single day, knowing that the clock is ticking but choosing to dance anyway. Number 3, Hyunjin broke us, a boy on a practice room floor apologizing for being human while his members fought back tears around him. Number 2, Han showed us the intersection of body and mind, an ankle sprain that triggered a panic attack, and a team that responded with a crisis protocol born from love and repetition. And number 1, Bang Chan showed us the paradox of the protector, a leader who broke himself carrying everyone else until his own youngest member handed him back the lesson he'd been teaching all along. What do all 7 of these stories have in common? Not the injuries themselves. Those range from sprains to spasms to cracked ribs to herniated discs. What they share is the response. In every single story, the thing that saved the injured member wasn't the medical treatment. It wasn't the physiotherapy. It wasn't the rest protocol or the modified choreography. It was the other members. It was Changbin kneeling beside Han, counting breaths. It was Felix standing in Chan's studio doorway at midnight. It was Lino's eyes filling with tears at the sight of Hyunjin on the floor. It was and echoing Chan's own words back to him when the leader needed to hear them most. Stray Kids' real strength has never been their choreography, their music, or their stage presence, although all of those are extraordinary. Their real strength is that they've built something that goes beyond a professional group. They've built a system of mutual care so deeply embedded in their daily lives that it activates automatically when one of them falls. They don't just perform together. They heal together. They protect each other. They carry each other's weight without being asked and without keeping score. And for every stay watching this, the next time you see those 8 people on stage, executing a flawless performance with smiles that light up arenas, remember what it cost. Remember the ankle that swelled, the shoulder that locked, the rib that cracked, the knee that aches, the back that seized, the mind that spiraled, and the neck that nearly required surgery. Remember that what you're watching isn't just talent. It's resilience. It's sacrifice. It's love for the craft, for the fans, and most importantly, for each other. That's not just a top list. That's a testament. And that's Stray Kids. Thank you for watching, Stays. This channel is now closed on this topic. Until next time, stay safe, stay kind, and never forget what your idols go through to make you smile.